Okay, our last speaker of the afternoon will be Eric Loboschefsky. He received his PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering from the University of California at Davis this last spring. His research largely encompassed developing, programming, and applying bioenergetics and individual-based models to striped bass and longfin smelt in the San Francisco estuary. He is a water resources engineer with the California Department of Water Resources, working in the Suisun Marsh program. Eric?
Yours is number 4.
Number 4.
Is the top one? Thanks. Thank you, everyone. I'll try to stay awake here along with everyone. So this, just a little brief background about this part of my dissertation. And this was published. I have a slide of it, not there. There. This was published last year in the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science Journal. But it arose out of a larger study which was developing and applying an individual base model for striped bass out here in the San Francisco Bay-Delta area. So this is kind of a subset of a larger model that evolved into its own paper. The individual base model for striped bass is still pending some final edits, but that is getting submitted here eventually, next few months, hopefully. So briefly, what I'm going to talk about here today is for this bioenergetics work, there were two main objectives. First, to develop abundance estimates of subadult striped bass, so that's age 1 and age 2. If you guys follow today, that's a lot of what's missing is in the subadult category of striped bass. There's a lot of lack of information there. One of them is abundance estimates. Secondly, quantify the consumption of prey by striped bass for subadult and adults. Briefly, a bioenergetics approach is a energy balance approach, and so it's the amount of energy available for growth is taken in by whatever is consumed, less the energetic costs of metabolism, excretion, and digestion. Also included in my analysis was the energetic cost associated with reproduction. It's not in this equation here because all these items are evaluated on a daily time step in my model, whereas the reproduction was added in as a yearly effect. Each of these components, consumption, metabolism also includes respiration. Excretion and digestion require species-specific constants that are derived from laboratory studies. For mine, I used from Chesapeake Bay striped bass. It was a study done in 1995 by Hartman. And that is relatively common to universally apply these species-specific constants. It's been done in other studies in the past. In addition to those constants, there's a suite of input data needed for this model to run. Among those are water temperature, annual growth rates, diets, and abundances. And it's worth noting that all of these were actually from field observations in the estuary out here. I'm just going to talk about how I arrived at the abundance data. All the other input data is a little more straightforward, and that is in this publication as well. So for age 1, I calculated age 1 abundance by taking the observed age 1 to age 3 survival rates from striped bass hatchery fish. 1981 to 1990, there was a study done that actually had survival rates published at that point. But that study ended in 1990, and I wanted to carry abundances through into 2003, 2004 time frame. And so I developed a simple regression relating the relating these survival rates to the survival of the spring X2 location. For age 2, we took mortality from age 2 to age 3, was inferred from age 3 to age 4, total mortality minus the harvest mortality of age 3 to 4. So that's basically saying that we're removing the harvest component of the age 3 to age 4 and applying that to the age 2 to 3. Age 3 to 7 abundances were a little more straightforward, as they were a little more readily available from Department of Fish and Game, and now Department of Fish and Wildlife, mark and recapture study. And these abundances were available from 69 to 2004. So here is, you're looking, these figures are cut right out of the publication. You're looking at subadult striped bass abundance in millions versus year 1981 to 2003. Age 1 is in these dark black bars, and age 2 is in the kind of hashed lighter colored bars. And it's a stacked bar diagram, so if you're looking at this tall peak here, you're talking about a little over 14 million age 1, and then your age 2 component is about 2 million or something on that order of magnitude. We're looking at adult striped bass abundance estimates here. Again, these are a lot more readily available from Fish and Wildlife. Females on the left, males on the right. Same deal with the stacked bar diagram. Your age 3 are at the bottom, and age 6 are at the top. We stack them on top of each other. It's worth noting both for the adult abundance estimates and the subadults, there's a lot of variability year to year. Here we're looking at, this is the results of the model now. So this is subadult population total consumption in millions of kilograms prey fish per year. Again, age 1 and age 2 stacked on top of each other. What you'll notice is this figure looks very similar in trend to the abundance estimates for subadults, which isn't terribly surprising. However, that is, it does tie in that the more fish you have, the more food is going to be consumed. Another note about this figure is you notice back in the subadult abundance estimates, there was a lot less age 2 than age 1. Here, you're looking at quite a bit of consumption is being done by age 2 in relation to age 1. Similar figure for the adult population total consumption. Again, your y-axis is in millions of kilograms of prey per year. And you got a difference in males and females. So again, a lot of your variability year to year, and it does trend fairly similarly with the abundance estimates. Overall, male consumption demands, if you sum up all the bars, were less than females. And there is several reasons for that. One is going to be your abundance differences in males and females. Another one would be that females will have higher reproductive costs than males. And a third is that I believe, if I remember correctly, that there were higher growth rates in females than males. Just more energy needed overall to reach their lengths, and so you're looking at more food that needs to be consumed to hit those targets. I included this, so this would be like summing the bars over all adult age classes over males and females. The key here is I want to point out these fairly large air bars, particularly in the latter years. And those error bars are associated with the uncertainties, or the error bars associated with the adult abundance estimates. So it really drives home the point at how those abundance estimates can impact this type of study, and how it can really drive and change any of your consumption estimates that you arrive at. Key point of this figure is I'm comparing the consumption by adults. So this is, again, same values that we just looked at in that previous diagram, and total subadult consumption. And you see there's similar trends between the two, and there's similar demands between the two. So based with the consumption, with the abundance estimates I arrived at with subadults, looking at a very similar consumption demands. It's also worth noting that bear in mind that especially for the subadults, we're not all talking about consuming of prey fish here. This can then, the subadults reflects benthic consumption and other organism consumptions, whereas the adults, their diets are more largely fish. Just kind of a summary, little conclusion here. There is, based upon what I arrived at, and I didn't show a figure with this, but adult individual consumption decreased throughout my study period. So that study period was from '69 to 2004. And that was largely driven by a decrease in growth rates over that time. And that is also evidenced in the, you can see that at the population level as well, as you have similar abundance estimates during a latter year as an earlier year, yet the total consumption demand is less. Conversely, age 2 individual consumption increased towards the latter years. And again, that you can see that at the population level. There wasn't any change that I could really point to in age 1. And kind of rehashing this point, population consumption increased during the late 90s especially, and that was driven largely by the increasing of abundance. And I discussed that. So some of the key assumptions of this, other than what I've already discussed, or to rehash on what I've already discussed, is some of these consumption estimates are inclusive of ocean-going striped bass. This is especially true for the adults. There isn't a division in the abundance data set I worked with on the populations that migrate out to the ocean. So they could be consuming a lot of that food out at sea. It is still a reflection on the amount of food needed to meet those requirements, but it shouldn't be thought about as that demand is specifically within the boundaries of the estuary. Abundance estimates relates to that point above, and as I mentioned, there was a very simple regression a based approach that I used to arrive at the age 1 and age 2 abundance estimates. So this is something that in the future can be revisited as we move forward. I neglected any intra-annual mortality, so I basically said if you have 1,000 fish of age 2, that there's going to be 1,000 fish for age 2 for the entire year. Yes, that's a very harsh assumption, but the problem is if I want to assign mortality, I need to understand where during the year to assign that mortality, because if that mortality happens consecutively or throughout the duration of the year, that's easy. But if it's bookended at the beginning or end, it's really going to shift those consumption estimates. So the decision was made to just neglect that mortality during the year and present that as an assumption. The diets that I assigned to the different age classes were relatively static over time. They didn't change by season. Changed on about the decade scale, and that was just a reflection of the available data that I had to work with. I wanted to maintain consistent data sets throughout the years that I was working with. So I didn't have a slide specific about how you can use this approach to evaluate consumption on salmonid species, but honing in on some of these assumptions, as well as breaking this down into a regional basis, and then thinking about how the striped bass interact with the salmon and the presence-absence would be a really important thing to do before you took any of this to say striped bass consume X amount of salmon, or striped bass consume an X percentage of the salmon population. With that, I'd like to work with funded IEP and DWR. Thank you to all my co-authors, and had a suite of assistance from multiple people. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Eric, can you put, maybe you can't do this, but put the consumption estimates in perspective for us about, so you're looking at combined consumption for the whole, all the age groups of around the order of 100 million kilograms per year. How many kilograms of smolts are produced in the system per year?
And that's been one of the stumbling blocks that we had with this work, is how to put that in the broader context. And I think there were, I think it was mentioned even earlier today that Steve, I believe, mentioned that, you know, even if they were to eat all the salmon coming out of the system, it's not anywhere enough to meet this requirement. And I think we did a back of the envelope calculation with Delta smelt as well, and it's only a tiny fraction. So, you know, that's where it really gets at these fish they have a lot of consumption demand, but where they're getting it, whether it's in estuary, whether 90% of that's out in the ocean, you know, that's where some of this needs to be refined, I believe.
Well, yeah, there's definitely that uncertainty about the diets, but I think you found something fairly concrete in that the consumptive demand is potentially quite extreme compared to the prey base.
Yes, yes, and that's, you know, where we were focusing on the age 1 and age 2. You know, again, assumptions aside, that there could be a large demand if those fish mainly reside within the estuary bounds. You know, but perhaps that could be all benthic prey too, for that age groups. So.
I'm curious how you handled uncertainty in your model, because I didn't see a lot of graphs with confidence intervals, just the population one. And of course, all of the parameters you're using have variance associated with them.
Yes. Yes, and I did not incorporate that this time around. We were looking at the uncertainty as mostly driven by the population abundance estimates.
So did you do, I mean, one way, if you have a bound on variance, would be to do separate runs at
Yes.
the low end and the high end and the mean. Did you do that? And what were
I
the
was
results?
starting down that road initially, and it kind of got pushed out of developing it any further. So that would be the way I would do it if I were to revisit this. You get those bioenergetics parameters, and you run maybe even a Monte Carlo type analysis where you just change everything, or you change one specific parameter.